Welcome to HOA Violation Vault. This is what selective enforcement looks like. Karen pointed at a single warped board and yelled that one flaw meant full removal. The rules do not care about your excuses. She stood there in her blue blazer with that badge clip catching the sun, one finger aimed at my fence like she was calling down judgment. I work logistics, I run on deadlines, and I knew exactly what this was. This was not about the fence. This was about control. Helen Perez, pool and amenities chair for the Cedar Point Homeowners Association in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She controlled access to every shared space like she was running a nightclub. And now she was standing in my yard telling me my fence was a hazard. One board. One warped board out of 60. I had replaced the fence 6 months ago after the old one rotted through. I pulled permits. I hired a licensed contractor. I followed every rule in the covenants. Helen did not care. She tapped that clipboard with the rain cover and said the board proved substandard materials and installation. Full removal or a fine schedule that started at $500 and doubled every week. I asked if she had board approval for this. She smiled. "You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants." That was her line. She said it like it was scripture. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Helen stepped closer. She said I was restricting HOA access by locking my back gate during work hours, and that gave her authority to inspect without notice. The lock was temporary. I worked nights coordinating shipments, and I had been dealing with package theft. The gate lock was a basic cable lock, and I left a key with the management company. Helen said that was not good enough. She wanted open access or she would cite me for obstruction. A neighbor watering the lawn paused mid-spray to stare. Helen did not lower her voice. She said the fence violated setback by 3 inches, and I needed a new survey. I had the survey from 6 months ago. She said it was invalid because I had not submitted it to the HOA for review before construction. That was not in the covenants. I checked. Helen said it was implied under the architectural review clause and I should have known. She walked the fence line, running her hand along the top rail. She stopped at the one warped board and knocked on it twice. "This proves you cut corners." She said I had 72 hours to submit a removal plan, or the fines would start. I asked what removal plan meant. She said full tear down, haul off, and replacement with pre-approved materials. I asked who approved the materials. She said the board would review my application after I paid the inspection fee. I asked how much. She said $200 for the first review, then $150 for every revision. I felt my chest tighten. I am supporting family back home. My mom has medical bills, my sister is in school, and I send money every month. I cannot afford surprise fees or a tow bill. Helen saw my face and smiled again. "You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants." She turned and walked back toward the street. She stopped at my curb and planted an orange reflective marker in the grass, then took a photo with her phone. She said that marker indicated active enforcement. If I moved it, that was tampering. I called the management company. The rep said Helen had submitted a compliance report, but it had not been reviewed by the full board yet. I asked if that meant the fine schedule was not official. The rep hesitated. She said Helen sometimes moves faster than procedure, but the board usually backs her up. I asked for a copy of the report. The rep said it was still in draft and I would get it when the board finalized it. I said I needed to see what I was being accused of. The rep said she would check with Helen. That told me everything. Helen was not waiting for the board. She was running her own enforcement operation, and management was too scared to stop her. I went back outside. The orange marker was still there. I left it. I took photos of the fence from every angle. I took close-ups of the warped board. I took wide shots showing the entire structure. I took photos of the survey stakes still in the ground from 6 months ago. I took photos of the permit approval letter taped inside my garage. I started building a timeline. Permit filed March 10th. Approved March 18th. Contractor started March 23rd. Final inspection March 30th. Passed. Fence completed April 2nd. No complaints until today, September 14th. 6 months of silence, then suddenly one warped board was a crisis. I called my contractor. He remembered the job. He said the lumber was standard grade, same as every fence in the neighborhood, and one board warping after 6 months was normal settling. He offered to come out and replace it for free as a courtesy. I asked if he could do it this week. He said he could do it tomorrow. I texted him my address again and thanked him. Then I called a friend who works in city code enforcement. His name is Marcus. He has seen every HOA trick. I told him what Helen was demanding. He laughed. He said a single warped board is not a code violation, and the HOA cannot force removal of a compliant structure. He said if Helen keeps pushing, she is liable for harassment. He offered to send me the city fence ordinance and the relevant state statutes. I said yes. That night I got an email from the Cedar Point portal. The subject line said violation notice pending. I opened it. The body said my account had been flagged for multiple infractions, including unapproved fencing, restricted access, and failure to respond to compliance requests. The email said I had 48 hours to submit a remediation plan or my account would be referred to collections. There was no detail, no list of infractions, no evidence, just the threat. I replied asking for specifics. The email bounced. The reply address was noreply@cedarpointoa.org. I logged into the portal to look for the notice. The portal was down. Error 500. Internal server error. I called the management company again. I got voicemail. I left a message saying the portal was down and I could not access my account. I said I needed the violation details before the deadline. No callback. I texted Marcus and told him about the email. He said that was a classic pressure tactic. Vague threats, tight deadlines, no documentation. He said I should document every attempt to get information and keep copies of everything. He said if the HOA actually tried to send me to collections without due process, I could file a complaint with the state attorney general. I felt a little better knowing I had options, but I also knew Helen was not going to make this easy. The next morning my contractor showed up. His truck had his company name on the side, and he brought a helper. They pulled the warped board, checked the frame, and installed a new board in about 20 minutes. The new board was the same grade, same stain, same dimensions. The contractor took photos of the before and after. He said if anyone asked, he would confirm the repair met all codes and standards. He did not charge me. He said he remembered Helen from another job in Cedar Point, and he did not want her causing trouble for his business. He told me she had called him 2 years ago demanding he remove a deck because the railing was half an inch too short. He refused. The homeowner got an engineer to certify it, and Helen backed off. He said she operates on intimidation, and most people fold. I thanked him and walked back inside. I made coffee and sat down to organize my evidence. I had the permit approval, the contractor invoice, the inspection report, the survey, the photos, and now the repair documentation. I put it all in a folder with printed copies and digital backups. I labeled it by date. I wrote a 1-page summary with a timeline. I did not know when I would need it, but I wanted it ready. That afternoon, Helen came back. She did not knock. She walked around the side of my house with another woman I did not recognize. They both had clipboards with rain covers. Helen pointed at the fence and said something to the other woman. The other woman took photos. I went outside. I asked what they were doing. Helen said she was conducting a follow-up inspection with a witness. I asked if she had permission to be on my property. She said the covenants allowed access for enforcement purposes. I said the covenants required notice. She said verbal notice counted and she had told me yesterday. I said that was not how it worked. Helen ignored me. She walked up to the fence and ran her hand along the new board. She knocked on it. She turned to the other woman and said it was a different color and did not match. The other woman nodded and wrote something down. I said the board was the same stain and it would weather to match in a few weeks. Helen said I had altered the structure without HOA approval, and that triggered a new review. I asked what that meant. She said I would need to submit a new application with updated photos and pay the inspection fee again. I said I was repairing a defect she had identified. She said the repair was not pre-approved. I said that was insane. She said I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. The other woman smiled. I pulled out my phone and started recording again. Helen turned to the other woman and said I was being hostile. The other woman said she felt unsafe. They both walked back toward the street. Helen stopped at the orange marker. She adjusted it and took another photo. She said the marker would stay until the issue was resolved. I called Marcus. I told him what just happened. He said Helen had just committed trespass and I should file a police report. I said I did not want to escalate to police yet because I was worried it would make things worse. Marcus said that was my call, but I should document it in case I needed it later. He said he would email me a template for a formal complaint to the HOA board. He said I should send it certified mail so there was proof of delivery. He also told me about a neighbor of his who won a harassment case against an HOA by keeping a detailed log of every interaction. I started a new document. I titled it HOA Contact Log. I wrote down every date, time, person, and action. I included the initial confrontation, the email, the portal outage, the trespass, and the new inspection demand. That night I got another email. This one had an attachment. The subject line said Final Warning Compliance Deadline. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF with no letterhead, no signature, and no date. It said my fence was non-compliant due to unauthorized alteration and failure to maintain uniform appearance. It said I had 24 hours to submit a removal plan and pay a $1,000 emergency assessment or the HOA would place a lien on my property. I read it 3 times. There was no reference to any board vote, no citation of specific covenant sections, no contact information, just threats. I forwarded it to Marcus. He called me 10 minutes later. He said the document was garbage, no legal weight. He said if the HOA actually tried to lien my property without a board vote and proper notice, I could sue and win. He said I should not pay anything, and I should file a formal dispute. He said he could come to the next board meeting as a witness if I needed him. I said I did not know when the next meeting was. He said I should check the bylaws. Most HOAs are required to hold monthly meetings and post agendas in advance. I pulled up the Cedar Point bylaws online. Monthly meetings, 3rd Thursday, 7 p.m., community center. That was tomorrow night. I decided to go. I printed copies of everything. Permit, survey, contractor statement, photos, timeline, the fake email, the trespass log, and Marcus's code enforcement contact info. I put it all in a binder. I practiced what I wanted to say. I wanted to stay calm, stick to facts, and make Helen defend her actions in front of the board. I did not know if the board would side with me, but I knew showing up with documentation was better than letting Helen run unopposed. The next morning I got a text from a neighbor I barely knew. Her name was Angela. She said she heard Helen was targeting me and she wanted to warn me. She said Helen had done the same thing to another neighbor 2 years ago over a mailbox. The neighbor fought it, Helen escalated, and eventually the neighbor just moved. Angela said Helen has a pattern. She picks one person, finds a violation, and then manufactures more violations until the person either complies or leaves. Angela said she would be at the meeting tonight and she would speak up if needed. I thanked her. It felt good to know I was not alone. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where Karens get exactly what they deserve. I spent the afternoon going over my notes. I made a list of questions. Did Helen have board approval for any of this? Who authorized the inspection fees? What was the process for appealing a violation? I wanted to force the board to answer on the record. I also wanted to see if anyone else on the board even knew what Helen was doing. If she was acting alone, that gave me leverage. If the board was backing her, I needed to know so I could adjust my strategy. At 6:45, I drove to the community center. The parking lot was half full. I recognized a few cars from my street. I walked inside. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front and rows of folding chairs facing it. Helen was already there, sitting at the table with 3 other board members. She had her clipboard and a stack of folders. She saw me and her expression did not change. She looked back down at her papers. I sat in the 3rd row. Angela was 2 rows behind me. She gave me a nod. A few other neighbors trickled in. By 7, the room had about 15 people. The board president, a man in his 60s named Ron, called the meeting to order. He went through the standard agenda. Minutes from last meeting, treasurer report, landscaping update. I waited. About 20 minutes in, Ron said they were moving to compliance issues. Helen cleared her throat. She said she had identified multiple violations in the community, and she wanted to present enforcement recommendations. She started with someone else, a guy who had painted his front door the wrong shade of blue. Helen said it violated the approved color palette and needed to be repainted. The guy started to argue. Ron cut him off and said they would table it for review. Helen moved on. She said my name. She said I had installed a non-compliant fence, obstructed HOA access, and made unauthorized alterations without approval. She said the violations were severe and warranted immediate action. She recommended a lien and forced removal. I stood up. I said I wanted to respond. Ron looked annoyed, but he nodded. I walked to the front. I opened my binder. I said I had pulled a permit, hired a licensed contractor, passed inspection, and followed every rule. I showed the permit approval letter. I showed the survey. I showed the contractor statement. I said the so-called unauthorized alteration was a repair of a single warped board that Helen herself had identified as a defect. I said I had documentation of every step, and Helen had provided 0 evidence of any actual violation. Helen interrupted. She said the board did not need to see my paperwork because the violations were obvious. I said that was not how enforcement worked. Ron asked Helen if she had photos. She said yes. She pulled out her phone and showed a photo of the fence. It looked normal. Ron squinted at it. He asked what the violation was. Helen pointed at the screen. She said the board was a different color. Ron said he could not tell from the photo. Helen said that proved I was trying to hide it. Angela stood up. She said she lived 2 doors down and she had watched the whole thing. She said Helen had trespassed on my property twice, demanded fees that were not in the bylaws, and threatened a lien without board approval. She said this was harassment. Helen turned red. She said Angela was out of order. Ron banged a gavel. He said everyone needed to calm down. He asked Helen if she had brought the issue to the board before issuing notices. Helen hesitated. She said she had authority under her role as compliance officer. Ron said that was not an answer. He asked if there had been a vote. Helen said no. Ron sighed. He said they needed to review the bylaws and table this until next month. Helen stood up fast. She said tabling it would let me off the hook. Ron said that was not his problem. He said enforcement actions required board approval, and Helen should have known that. Helen grabbed her folders and walked out. The room went silent. Ron looked at me. He said I should consider the matter on hold pending review, and if I had concerns about Helen's conduct, I could file a formal complaint with management. I said I already had. Ron nodded. He moved to the next agenda item. I sat back down. I felt my hands shaking. Angela leaned forward and whispered that I did great. I did not feel great. I felt like I had just poked a bear. I knew Helen was not going to let this go. I stayed for the rest of the meeting. Nothing else interesting happened. When it ended, I walked out fast. I did not want to run into Helen in the parking lot. The next morning, I got a knock on my door. I opened it. 2 people I did not recognize, a man and a woman, both in business casual. The man said they were with a property inspection company contracted by Cedar Point HOA. He said they were here to conduct a full exterior audit of my home. I asked if they had an appointment. The woman said notice was sent via email. I said I did not get an email. The man said that was not their problem. He said they were authorized to inspect and I needed to provide access. I said no. I said I had just been to a board meeting where the president said enforcement actions required board approval, and I had not heard of any vote. The man said they were not enforcement, they were assessment. I said that sounded like the same thing. The woman pulled out a tablet and started taking photos of my front door. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I said if they did not leave, I was calling the police. The man said that was my right, but refusal to cooperate would be noted in their report. They walked around the side of my house. I followed them. They took photos of the fence, the gate, the siding, the gutters, and the driveway. I recorded the whole thing on my phone. When they finished, they walked back to their car without saying anything. I went inside and called Marcus. He said that was intimidation and I should file a police report this time. I said I would. He said he would also reach out to the management company and ask what company they hired. He said if the company was legit, they should have scheduling records. If they were not, that was fraud. I hung up and called the non-emergency police line. An officer said he would send someone out to take a report. 20 minutes later, a deputy showed up. I showed him the video. I explained the HOA situation. He took notes. He said trespassing required a no trespass warning first, and since this was the first police contact, he would log it, but there was not much he could do unless they came back. He said I should post no trespassing signs and if anyone ignored them, call immediately. He also said the inspection company angle sounded like a scam, and I should report it to the Attorney General. I thanked him. He left. I felt like I was drowning in paperwork, and nobody could actually stop Helen. That afternoon, Marcus called me back. He said the management company had no record of hiring an inspection company. He said that meant the two people were either hired directly by Helen or they were not real inspectors. He said I should assume everything they documented would be used against me, so I needed to be ready to counter it. He said he had a friend who was a real estate attorney and she might be willing to consult for free. I said yes. Marcus texted me her number. Her name was Diane. I called her that night. She said she had seen cases like this before. She said HOAs have a lot of power, but they also have strict procedural requirements, and when they skip steps, they lose. She said if Helen kept pushing without board approval, I could sue for harassment and abuse of process. She said the key was documentation, which I already had. She also said I should request all HOA records related to my property under state sunshine laws. She said if there were no records, that proved Helen was acting alone. If there were records, I could use them to show bias or procedural violations. I drafted a formal records request. I asked for all board meeting minutes, compliance reports, violation notices, fee schedules, and communications related to my address for the past 12 months. I sent it certified mail to the management company and copied the board president. I kept a copy for my file. Diane said the HOA had 10 business days to respond. 2 days later, I got a call from Ron, the board president. He said he had received my records request and he wanted to talk. He said the board was reviewing Helen's actions and they had concerns. He said Helen had been issuing notices and fees without board approval for months, and my complaint had opened a bigger investigation. He said they were considering removing her from the compliance role. He asked if I would be willing to hold off on legal action while they sorted it out. I said I would hold off, but I wanted a written statement that all fees and liens related to my property were void. Ron said he would work on it. I felt cautiously optimistic, but I also knew Helen was still out there and she was not going to take this quietly. I kept documenting everything. I kept the orange marker in my yard as evidence. I kept recording every interaction. I kept my binder updated. A week later, I got the records. The management company sent a flash drive with scanned documents. I opened it. There were board meeting minutes going back 2 years. I searched for my address. Nothing. I searched for Helen's name. She appeared in almost every set of minutes, usually reporting on compliance issues. but there was no record of any vote or discussion about my fence. I found one mention from 3 months ago where Helen reported that she was increasing enforcement patrols, and the board thanked her for her diligence. That was it. I also found something else. In the last 6 months, Helen had issued violation notices to 11 different homeowners. 8 of them had paid fees, 3 had disputed. Of the 3 who disputed, 2 had eventually paid after Helen escalated. 1 had moved. I was the 4th dispute, and the first one to push back with documentation and legal threats. I realized Helen had been running a shakedown operation and nobody had stopped her because most people just paid. I sent the records to Diane. She called me the next day. She said this was a slam-dunk harassment case. She said the lack of board approval, the pattern of targeting, and the fake inspection company were all evidence of bad faith. She said if I wanted to settle, I could demand Helen be removed, all fees refunded, and a formal apology. If I wanted to sue, I could go for damages and attorney fees. I said I wanted her removed and I wanted the HOA to fix their process so this did not happen to anyone else. Diane said she would draft a demand letter. Before she sent it, I got a text from Angela. She said Helen was going door to door with a petition. The petition said I was a problem resident who refused to follow rules and the HOA should take stronger action. Angela said Helen had already been to 5 houses and 3 people signed. Angela said she confronted Helen on the sidewalk and told her the petition was based on lies. Helen told Angela to mind her business. Angela said she shut her down in front of me. I felt grateful, but also anxious. Helen was not giving up. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. Diane sent the demand letter. It went to the board president, the management company, and Helen personally. It outlined the violations, the lack of board approval, the harassment, the fake inspectors, and the retaliation. It demanded Helen be removed from any compliance role, all fees and notices be voided, and a written apology. It gave them 14 days to respond or we would file suit. I did not know what would happen, but I felt like I had finally taken control. 3 days later, Ron called me again. He said the board had held an emergency meeting. He said they had voted to remove Helen from the compliance officer role and place her on probation. He said all fees and liens related to my property were voided. He said the board was implementing new procedures requiring board approval before any enforcement action. He said they were also hiring a neutral third-party compliance company to handle future issues. He asked if that was acceptable. I said I also wanted a formal letter stating that my fence was compliant and no further action would be taken. Ron agreed. He said he would send it by the end of the week. I asked what happened to the petition. Ron sighed. He said Helen had collected 8 signatures, but when the board reviewed it, they found most of the signers did not even know what they were signing. He said one neighbor thought it was about speeding in the neighborhood. Ron said the petition was invalid, and they had notified everyone who signed. He also said if Helen tried anything like this again, she would be removed from the board entirely. I felt relieved, but I was not done. I still had the trump card. I had been holding it because I wanted Helen to commit to her story publicly. I had a video of Helen threatening me. It was from the second trespass when she brought the other woman. I had my phone recording in my pocket, and the audio was clear. Helen said if I did not pay the fees, she would make sure I could not use any HOA amenities. She would block my access to the pool, and she would personally ensure my life in Cedar Point was miserable. She said it in a tone that was cold and specific. It was not just a violation threat. It was harassment. It was a threat that clearly crossed the line. I had not played it at the board meeting because I wanted Helen to keep escalating. I wanted her to go door to door, to bring fake inspectors, to build a paper trail that proved intent. Now I had everything. I sent the video to Diane. She said it was perfect. She said it proved Helen was acting out of personal malice, not legitimate HOA business. She said we could use it to support a restraining order if needed. I decided to play it at the next board meeting. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday, October 19th. Marcus had offered to testify, and he could only make it that night before his travel plans. I needed to move fast. I confirmed with Ron that I could add an item to the agenda. He said yes. I printed a transcript of the video. I loaded the video on my phone and brought a portable speaker in case the room audio was bad. The night of the meeting, the room was packed. Word had spread. Angela was there. Marcus was there. A few neighbors I had never spoken to were there. Helen was there, sitting in the audience, not at the board table. She looked tense. Ron called the meeting to order. He went through the standard items quickly. Then he said we had a special agenda item related to the previous compliance issue. He asked me to come forward. I stood up. I walked to the front. I said I appreciated the board's actions to correct the situation, but I wanted to make sure everyone understood how serious Helen's conduct had been. I said I had evidence that her actions were not just procedural errors, but intentional harassment. I played the video. The room went silent. Helen's voice came through the speaker, clear, cold, threatening. When it finished, I looked at the board. I said I did not correct her lie, because I wanted her to commit to it in public. I said this was not about offense. This was about abuse of power. Helen stood up. She tried to interrupt. She said the recording was taken without her consent. Ron banged the gavel. He said Helen was out of order. The board member next to Ron, a woman named Linda, said she had heard enough. She motioned to remove Helen from the board entirely. The motion passed 4-0. Helen did not get a vote. Ron said the decision was effective immediately, and Helen needed to leave. Helen grabbed her bag and walked out. She slammed the door. The room erupted. People started talking. Angela stood up and clapped. Marcus gave me a thumbs up. Ron banged the gavel again. He said the board would issue a formal statement, and anyone who had been affected by Helen's actions should contact management for a review. He thanked me for bringing the evidence forward. He said the board was committed to transparency and fairness going forward. After the meeting, Marcus came up to me. He said I handled it perfectly. He said most people would have played the trump card too early, and Helen would have found a way to spin it. By waiting, I let her dig her own grave. Angela hugged me. She said she was glad someone finally stood up to Helen. A few other neighbors introduced themselves and thanked me. One guy said Helen had fined him $300 last year for parking a trailer in his driveway overnight, and he paid it because he did not know he could fight it. He asked if he could get a refund. I told him to contact the management company and reference the board's decision. The next week, I got the formal letter from Ron. It said my fence was compliant, no further action would be taken, and all previous notices were void. It also said the board had implemented new policies requiring board votes for all enforcement actions, mandatory written notice with appeal rights, and a third-party review process. The letter was signed by all 4 remaining board members. I filed it with my other documents. I also got a check. The management company refunded the $200 inspection fee I had never actually paid, but which had been logged in their system. I did not ask questions. I deposited it. 2 weeks later, Angela texted me. She said Helen had tried to hire a contractor to take photos of other properties in the neighborhood to build new violation cases. The contractor recognized Helen from my situation and refused. He also reported her to the local contractor licensing board for attempting to solicit false documentation. Angela said the story was spreading, and other contractors in the area were blacklisting Cedar Point HOA because they did not want to deal with the drama. She said the board was scrambling to find vendors for upcoming projects. That was the outcome. A vendor blacklisted the HOA after Karen was caught ordering staged photos, and the board had to scramble for contractors. Helen disappeared from neighborhood events. I heard through Angela that she resigned from the board entirely a month later and moved out of Cedar Point by the end of the year. I do not know where she went. I do not care. The orange reflective marker stayed in my yard for a few more weeks until I finally tossed it. It felt good to throw it away. The fence is fine. The one board that started this whole mess weathered perfectly, and now you cannot even tell which one it was. I still see Marcus occasionally. He still laughs about the video. He said I should have been a lawyer. I told him I just wanted to coordinate shipments and pay my bills in peace. He said that was fair. The new compliance process works. I have not had a single issue since. The board sends written notices now, with clear citations and appeal instructions. It is boring and professional, which is exactly what it should be. I still support my family back home. My mom is doing better. My sister graduated. I send money every month, and I do not have to worry about surprise fines or fake fees. Helen tried to use the rules as a weapon. She lost. The HOA voted to require actual evidence before fines. Karen's complaint was ruled unfounded with evidence cited. The funny karma beat happened at a public meeting moment where the minutes turned against Karen. She tried to interrupt, and the meeting voted anyway. That was it. That was the whole story. One warped board, 6 months of chaos, and a compliance officer who forgot that documents beat vibes every single time. I appreciate you rolling with the chaos.